All right, so today we're really going to dive deep into this case. It's a tough one, really tragic, and it's sparked a lot of debate. Yeah, it's a story about a car crash, a fatal one, but it goes way beyond that, gets into all these questions about accountability and justice, especially when it comes to young people who commit crimes. We've got 3 news articles we're looking at, all about this case in Pune, India.
Yeah, this case is really fascinating. I mean, tragic, obviously, but it really highlights what all juvenile justice systems struggle with. How do you balance rehabilitation with the need to hold someone accountable for their actions, especially when, the public is outraged?
Right, and this case is like the perfect example of that tension. So let's set the scene. We're talking May 19th, 2024. It's late, like 2:30 in the morning in Kalyanagar, India. 2 young software engineers, Anish and Ashwini, both 24 years old, they're on a motorcycle, and suddenly, boom, this speeding Porsche just slams into them.
And the driver of that Porsche, a 17-year-old. And to make matters worse, it's alleged he was driving under the influence.
It's just devastating. Anish and Ashwini, they died at the scene.
It's every parent's worst nightmare, honestly. And this is where the story becomes bigger than just a tragic accident.
Right. It becomes this focal point for a much larger conversation because this case goes to the Juvenile Justice Board, the JJB. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, their job is to figure out how to deal with these cases with minors. They decide if a young person is treated as an adult in court or if they fall under juvenile law, which is much more focused on rehabilitation.
And that right there, that's the core of this whole controversy.
Yeah.
How do we view young offenders? How do we respond to them? And in this case, the JGB decided to grant bail to this teenager.
And that decision is where things really blew up. The conditions of the bail, well, let's just say they sparked some serious outrage.
A 300-word essay on road safety.
A 300-word essay, that's it. I mean, I get it. It seems like a slap on the wrist when 2 people are dead. The optics were, to put it lightly, not great.
It just fueled this deep-seated anger and frustration, this feeling that the system goes easy on young offenders, especially if they come from wealthy families, which in this case the accused did.
Right. So you've got this perfect storm brewing, a horrific accident, a young offender, and a bail decision that seemed, at least on the surface, very, very lenient. So what happens next? Did it just go away?
No, not at all. It went viral. I mean, really blew up online. And that put a ton of pressure on the authorities. And, public outcry, even if it's based on misinformation sometimes, can be a powerful tool. It can force accountability. And in this case, it led to a full-blown inquiry into the JJB and how they handled this whole thing. And that inquiry, well, that's where things get really interesting. The public wanted answers, right?
Yeah.
They wanted to know how this could happen, how this kid gets off with a 300-word essay when 2 people are dead.
Yeah. I mean, was there actually something wrong with how the JJB handled this, or was it just, public pressure?
Well, the inquiry's findings were, let's just say, not good. Remember how the JJB, their whole thing, is to decide if a minor should be tried as an adult?
Right. Huge decision, potentially life-changing.
Exactly. A huge responsibility. And in this case, get this, the inquiry found that the bail hearing, that initial hearing, it was conducted with only one JJB member present.
Hold on. One person.
Yeah.
One person decided this. This wasn't a parking ticket. This was a fatal accident we're talking about.
That's it. One person. And the JGB, it's designed to be this deliberative body, right? Multiple perspectives, especially for something this serious. Having just one person make that call, it raises some major red flags.
Yeah, no kidding. So what else did they find? Did the inquiry flag anything else about how this was handled?
Oh, yeah, for sure. They also pointed out how fast everything happened, how quickly bail was granted. It just felt rushed, like they weren't really considering the gravity of what happened. It all became about this 300-word essay. And the bigger picture, whether this kid should even be released, it got lost in the shuffle.
It's easy to get caught up in the outrage, understandably so. But for those who aren't as familiar with the JJB, can you talk a bit about the philosophy behind it? Why treat juvenile offenders differently?
Yeah, that's a really important point and something a lot of people don't realize. Juvenile justice, it operates on a different principle than the adult system, globally, not just in India. It's not about well, not primarily. It's about rehabilitation.
So it's more about giving them a chance to actually turn their life around, right?
Exactly. The idea is that young people, even the ones who mess up badly, they have a better chance of changing, of becoming better. Their brains are still developing, their judgment isn't fully formed. And the juvenile justice system recognizes that.
That makes sense. But how do you balance the need to rehabilitate with the fact that, in this case, 2 people are dead? There has to be some accountability.
Right. And that is the million-dollar question. That's the tightrope that every juvenile justice system has to walk. How do you balance accountability with the potential for change? It's not about letting them off the hook, but it's also about recognizing that they're not finished products. They can still grow.
So in this case, it sounds like the JJB maybe didn't quite find that balance.
The inquiry definitely seemed to think so, yeah. The two JJB members who were involved in the bail hearing, they were actually terminated.
Wow, they lost their jobs over this.
They did. Their actions were considered misuse of power and procedural lapses.
It's more than just a slap on the wrist. It sounds like this whole case really exposed some cracks in the system itself.
It absolutely did. And this is where the story becomes more than just this one case in India. It forces us to look at how we think about juvenile justice on a global scale.
It's such a difficult thing, right? You have this young person and they do something awful. I mean, we can't minimize that. But there's also this instinct, at least for some people, to, I don't know, not give up on them entirely, to believe that they can change.
And it's incredibly complicated. We see this all the time, not just in India. It's a global thing. This struggle to reconcile the need for punishment with this idea, this hope that young people can be rehabilitated.
And this case really brings that tension to the forefront. One thing I kept thinking about when I was reading these articles was how differently this might have played out somewhere else.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about some European countries. They've been trying out these restorative justice models where the focus is less on punishment and more on repairing the harm that was done.
So instead of just locking someone up, it's about trying to make amends, to actually address the harm caused.
Exactly. And in this case, imagine if there had been a way for this teenager to actually sit down with the families of the victims, to hear firsthand the impact of his actions, to take responsibility. I mean, it's a very different approach.
It really is. It takes the focus off punishment and puts it on healing, on trying to, find some sort of resolution, even if it's imperfect.
Right. And it's not a perfect solution. Restorative justice has its own issues, but it makes you think.
It does. It makes you wonder if there are other ways to approach these situations, ways that might be more effective in the long run. I guess what I'm realizing is that this case, it's not just about one incident. It's about how we as a society think about justice when it comes to young people.
I completely agree. It's messy, it's emotional, and honestly, we're all still figuring it out. There's no easy answer. Each case is different, and there are so many factors at play. The law, people's emotions, it's a minefield. But this case, it forces us to ask ourselves some tough questions. What do we truly value? What's more important, punishment or rehabilitation? Do we want revenge, or do we want to prevent these tragedies from happening again?
Those are big questions.
They are, but they're questions we can't shy away from.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's something you hope our listeners are thinking about? What's the takeaway for you?
For me, it comes down to this. How do we hold young offenders accountable in a way that actually leads to real change? Not just punishment, but genuine remorse, rehabilitation. How do we make justice about more than just a sentence? How do we make it about healing, about preventing future harm?
It's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Between accountability and compassion.
Exactly.
Well, those are some heavy things to ponder, but I think you're right. They're things we need to be talking about, debating, wrestling with, even if there aren't easy answers. And on that note, we'll leave it there for today, but we hope this conversation continues, that you keep thinking about these issues because they're not going away anytime soon.